My name is Linda Schreider, and at 34 years old, I truly believed I understood the man I had married. After 7 years together, 4 of them as husband and wife, I thought I knew the shape of his loyalty, the weight of his word, and the boundaries of what he would never cross. But 3 weeks ago, I learned that some betrayals do not arrive as confessions or confrontations. Some arrive disguised as a dinner you thought was made with love. My husband, Felix Mercer, is 33 and an executive chef at a boutique hotel downtown. Cooking isn't just his job. It's the center of his identity. He prides himself on technique, creativity, and the kind of confidence that makes people trust whatever he puts on a plate. I was no exception. I have always trusted him. That evening, he set the table as if preparing for a restaurant tasting menu: freshly baked bread, assorted crackers, wine he had opened an hour before to let it breathe, and a small, elegant jar of what he claimed was pâté he had been experimenting with. He told me he wanted my honest feedback, and I didn't think twice about giving it. I spread a modest amount on a cracker, tasted it, and offered a thoughtful nod. It was rich, a little gamey, but I assumed that was the style he was aiming for. He urged me to try more. I did several bites while he watched with an intensity I misinterpreted as pride. I didn't notice he was recording me. I didn't question why he kept pressing, "Really good. You really like it." I only noticed something was wrong when he suddenly burst into laughter. Not a small laugh, but an uncontrollable, doubled-over, breathless fit that made him slap the table for balance. Confused, I asked what was funny, and he finally managed to choke out the truth. He held up a small can with a bright label premium lamb and rosemary dog food and told me that he had blended it with herbs as a joke. He said it was technically edible and that people try it at trade shows all the time, as if that somehow justified the fact that my own husband had tricked me into eating pet food. I stared at him in stunned silence, waiting for him to realize how humiliating the moment was, how intimate a violation it felt like. But he was far too amused to care. When he finally lifted his phone to show me the recording complete with my genuine reactions, my thoughtful nods, my trust laid bare, it became clear that he hadn't just planned the prank, he had prepared to broadcast it. He told me he wanted to post it on TikTok because it would blow up, because people would love it, because this is hilarious. I didn't find it funny. My chest tightened, my stomach turned, and I walked away from the table before the nausea and betrayal collided in my throat. In the bathroom, I threw up not because of the dog food, but because something inside me felt shattered. When I returned, hoping he would at least be sobered by the look on my face, he was already editing the video, adding captions, choosing music, and dismissing my discomfort as dramatic. When I told him to delete it, he refused. When I said I was serious, he rolled his eyes. When I told him the prank crossed a line, he told me to go cool off at your sister's and announced that he would post it anyway. So I packed a bag. He didn't stop me. He didn't apologize. He didn't even pause what he was doing. At my sister's apartment, I barely made it through the door before crying. I told her everything, every detail, and she listened without judgment. That night I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment Felix laughed in my face while holding a can of dog food like a trophy. The next morning I checked the video. It had already passed 50,000 views. Comments poured in, some mocking me, some criticizing him, many. Debating whether it was harmless fun or cruelty. Felix was in the comments arguing with people proudly defending the prank and trying to turn the entire thing into a badge of comedic genius. He wasn't remorseful. He wasn't embarrassed. He was exhilarated. That was the moment something shifted in me. Instead of feeling powerless, I felt clear. Felix wasn't just my husband. He was a professional chef, someone whose entire career depended on responsible food preparation, ethical standards, and respect for consent in what he served. And he had publicly admitted to replacing a prepared item with dog food and feeding it to someone who didn't know what she was eating. I took screenshots, I downloaded the video, my hands shook, but my decision did not. I filed a formal complaint with the county health department, attaching the digital evidence Felix had proudly made public. I also contacted a divorce attorney and explained the situation. She took it seriously, more seriously than Felix ever had. That was the moment I finally accepted the truth. The prank wasn't the problem. The laughter wasn't the problem. The dog food wasn't even the problem. The real problem was that my husband believed humiliating me was entertainment, that deceiving me was harmless, and that my trust was something he could play with like a prop for his online audience. And once you see someone's cruelty clearly, you can't unsee it. I didn't expect Felix to call so quickly, but less than an hour after the health department confirmed receipt of my complaint, my phone lit up with his name. His voice wasn't apologetic. It wasn't even confused. It was furious. "Linda, are you out of your mind?" he snapped. The moment I answered, "You filed a complaint against me over a prank." "A prank." "Linda." I could hear him pacing, the sound of his breath fast and uneven. "You humiliated me publicly," I said calmly. "You tampered with my food, lied about it, filmed it, and posted it online. That isn't a prank, it's a violation." "Oh, for God's sake," he scoffed. "It was fancy dog food. Human grade. You're acting like I fed you poison." "You didn't tell me what I was eating," I replied. "That is the problem. The food itself isn't the point. It is the point," he yelled. "You're being dramatic, and now you're trying to destroy my career because your feelings got hurt." It was incredible he wasn't horrified, guilty, or concerned. He was angry that I refused to laugh along with everyone else. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. By the next day, his video had climbed even further. Tens of thousands more views. People arguing in the comments, some calling him hilarious, others calling him abusive, others saying, "I must be fragile if dog food shattered me." Felix was in those comments all day long, happily engaging, defending himself, mocking me again and again. Then the tone shifted. Wednesday morning, Felix called again, but this time instead of yelling, he sounded frantic. "They suspended me," he said. "The health department came to the hotel. They asked questions. They took statements. My boss said I can't be in the kitchen until the investigation is resolved. Paid suspension or not, do you understand what that looks like? Do you understand what you did?" "I didn't do it," I said. "You did." "You could fix this," he hissed. "Just tell them you overreacted. Tell them you're fine." "I'm not lying for you," I told him. "Not after everything." He cursed under his breath and hung up. That afternoon, the calls started first from his sister, then his best friend, then one of his coworkers. They repeated the same script. "It was a joke. You're overreacting. You're destroying him. You owe him a chance to make this right." Not one of them mentioned the humiliation. Not one of them acknowledged the violation. They all seemed more concerned with Felix's image than with my dignity. Of course, Felix wasn't satisfied with that. He escalated. "Thursday morning, I got a message from my manager at work. We received a concerning call from your husband. Can you join a video meeting?" my boss asked. My stomach dropped. During the meeting, my boss explained that Felix had contacted HR, claiming I was emotionally abusive, unstable, and retaliating against him. He said I was destroying his life out of spite. Luckily, when I offered to send the video as evidence, my boss agreed. He watched it. When he came back, the change in his expression was immediate. "This is what he said was emotional abuse?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes," I said. He sighed. "We're marking his call as harassment. If he contacts us again, let me know." Felix's attempt had backfired completely. Later that evening, he came to my sister's apartment unannounced. At around 9 p.m., pounding shook the door. "Open up," he shouted. "I need to talk to my wife." My sister cracked the door just enough to speak, blocking him. "She doesn't want to talk to you. Leave." "This is between us," he insisted. I stepped closer to the door but didn't open it. "You need to stop," I said through the narrow opening. "Go home. We'll talk when things calm down." "Calm down," he repeated, voice rising. "My entire career is falling apart, and you're hiding at your sister's like a coward." "We're done for tonight," I said firmly. My sister threatened to call the police. He finally left, still shouting down the hallway. The next morning, Felix changed tactics again. Instead of rage, he posted a new TikTok video, him crying, eyes red, voice trembling, as he told viewers that his wife couldn't handle a harmless joke and was weaponizing the legal system to destroy him. He painted himself as a victim, a misunderstood husband, a man whose playful nature had been cruelly punished. The comments split instantly. Some people coddled him, calling me controlling. Others called him manipulative and emotionally immature. He spent all day replying to every message that praised him and arguing viciously with anyone who didn't. Watching it all was like seeing a stranger use my life as content. That afternoon, my divorce attorney emailed the drafted separation filing. It felt surreal to see my name in legal documents tied to the word dissolution. But when I read the reasons, food tampering, public humiliation, emotional irresponsibility, I realized how accurate it all was. Later that evening, Felix texted me one more time. "You're doing this because you want to punish me. But you won't win. I built my career with you, and you're not taking it away. Fix this, or you'll regret it." I stared at the message for a long moment, and instead of fear or sadness, I felt something else, a sharper, quieter certainty. He still didn't understand. He still didn't see the line he crossed. And now that he was facing consequences, he wanted me to carry the weight of his choices. I closed the messages without replying. The more he spiraled, the more unmistakable the truth became. This wasn't about a prank. It was about who he was willing to become when he felt entitled to laugh at my expense. In the days following Felix's crying TikTok video, something in his behavior shifted not toward remorse, but toward entitlement. As if the moment consequences touched him, he suddenly believed he was the true victim of the situation. And when entitled people feel cornered, they don't change. They escalate. It began with our joint savings account. We had kept it for household expenses, emergencies, and long-term plans, vacations, repairs, the future we once thought we shared. There was a little over $8,000 in it. I hadn't touched it since leaving our apartment, but Felix had. My attorney called me first. He's withdrawn several $100s in the last 48 hours, she said. Multiple transactions. Small amounts, but consistent. I checked the account myself. The pattern was deliberate: $500 here, $300 there, another $150. When I confronted him over text, he replied instantly without apology. Felix, I need money for lawyer fees and living expenses. You abandoned me. I stared at the message in disbelief. I had never abandoned him. I'd left for my safety and dignity. But in Felix's mind, inconvenience was abandonment. My attorney acted swiftly, filing an emergency motion to freeze the account. The judge approved it, but Felix had already withdrawn $200. In a hearing call the next morning, the judge asked him directly where the money had gone. Felix claimed it was for necessary expenses. The judge asked for receipts. He had none. Eventually, he was ordered to return everything except what he could prove. He returned $400, insisting the remaining $700 went to essential costs that mysteriously left no paper trail. That was only the beginning. 2 days later, I drove to our apartment to gather the rest of my belongings. Felix knew I'd been staying with my sister, but the lease was still in both our names, and I was still paying my share. Legally, I had every right to enter. But when I inserted my key, the lock wouldn't turn. I tried again and again. A maintenance worker passing by stopped when he noticed my frustration. Everything okay? I think the lock's been changed, I said. Per policy, he radioed the landlord. Within minutes, I was on a phone call, confirming exactly what I already suspected. Felix had changed the locks without permission, without notifying anyone, and without giving me a key. That violates the lease, the landlord said firmly. We'll send maintenance with the master key. When they opened the door for me, the sight inside made my stomach twist. He had piled all of my belongings, clothes, books, toiletries, electronics, into a single messy mound in the middle of the living room, as if I were a guest who had overstayed. As if removing me from our home was as simple as gathering up my life and shoving it into a corner. There were no boxes, no order, no respect, just a heap. I took photos from every angle, documentation, evidence. When I began collecting everything, Felix wasn't home. He'd gone to work meetings or to plead with someone for sympathy. My sister came to help, and together we loaded everything into her car. It was humiliating, but necessary. An hour after we drove off, Felix called me. You broke into our apartment, he yelled the moment I picked up. I used the landlord's key, I said quietly. After you illegally changed the locks. I changed them for my safety. You changed them to control access, I said, and you piled my things in the living room. That's not safety. That's spite. You shouldn't have left. You made me feel unsafe. I haven't been in that apartment for 2 weeks, Felix. A long silence followed, and then he said, I want you off the lease. Remove yourself. You changed the locks. You violated the lease. If you want me off it, you'll have to break it yourself. He cursed and hung up. Later that evening, the landlord emailed both of us documenting the violation officially. One more incident, he said, and they would consider eviction proceedings. Felix's response was to escalate further. 2 mornings later, I received a notification for a scheduled emergency hearing. Felix had filed for a restraining order against me. The claims were absurd. He alleged I had harassed him by showing up unannounced at our apartment, an apartment I was still legally paying for and legally allowed to enter. He argued the health department complaint was targeted harassment and professional sabotage. He provided screenshots of messages showing nothing. At the hearing, the judge's irritation was almost immediate. Mr. Mercer, she said, reading his petition aloud, your wife has had minimal contact with you, except regarding legal proceedings and tenancy matters. Filing a regulatory complaint is not harassment. It's a civic action. Filing for divorce is not harassment. Retrieving her belongings from a shared property is not harassment. Felix tried to interrupt. Your Honor, with respect. No, she said sharply. Your petition is denied. You appear to be weaponizing the courts because you're upset about the consequences of your own behavior. I watched his expression crumble, shifting from indignation to insult to pure disbelief that the judge didn't see things his way. After the hearing outside the courthouse, he tried one more time to corner me. You happy now, he demanded. You're ruining my life. You ruined it when you fed me dog food and posted it for the world, I said. It was one mistake. It wasn't one mistake. It was a choice. And everything since then has been another choice. He stared at me like I had become a stranger he couldn't decode. Maybe I had. Maybe the version of me who tolerated things quietly was gone. He left in a storm of frustration, but the damage he still intended to cause hadn't even peaked yet. This was only the midpoint of his unraveling, and he was just beginning to lose control of everything he thought he could manipulate. If I had learned anything by this point, it was that Felix didn't know how to accept consequences. Any pressure on him, legal, financial, emotional, didn't make him step back and reflect. It made him lash out harder, and the more he spiraled, the more frantic and unreasonable his decisions became. The week after the failed restraining order hearing our attorneys scheduled mediation for asset division. I hadn't wanted the process to be hostile, but Felix made it that way from the start. We sat in separate rooms, each with our own attorney, while a mediator shuttled between us, trying to establish common ground. It became immediately clear that Felix had no intention of negotiating in good faith. His opening position was almost laughably arrogant. He wanted 60% of our assets. His argument that the emotional distress caused by my actions had harmed his career. My attorney didn't even blink. Your client recorded himself feeding my client dog food, she said to the mediator. He posted the evidence publicly. He boasted about it. The consequences he's facing are entirely self-inflicted. The mediator relayed this to Felix's side. Through the thin walls, I could hear raised voices, agitation, muffled swearing, Felix's emotional volatility bleeding through every attempt at professionalism. His attorney tried to pivot. My client has suffered significant distress. Distress from his own misconduct, my attorney cut in. My client will not subsidize your client's consequences. Hours passed in tedious, frustrating rounds of arguments. Felix demanded the apartment. Then he demanded I continue paying full rent. Then he insisted I reimburse him for the adverse impact to his reputation. Every proposal was more outrageous than the last. Eventually, under pressure from both attorneys, we reached an agreement. 50-50 split of all assets. Felix would keep his kitchen equipment and clothes. I would take my electronics and personal items. Shared furniture would be divided based on original purchase receipts. The apartment lease would remain shared, and each of us would pay our portion until it expired in 3 months. When the mediator delivered the terms to Felix's room, the thin wall between us did nothing to mask his meltdown. She's leaving me homeless, he shouted. Your client is fully capable of paying his portion of rent. The mediator replied, exhausted. He is not homeless. This divorce is her idea. She should pay everything. No, the mediator said flatly. I sat quietly listening to the chaos he created on the other side of the wall. I wondered how I had missed this side of him for so long. This inability to accept responsibility, this absolute refusal to consider anyone's perspective but his own. The mediation ended in paperwork and silence. Felix stormed out without looking at me. 2 days later, the health department concluded their investigation. I received a short email. Felix received a formal notice. His food handler's license was suspended pending retraining. That meant he couldn't legally work in a kitchen. And that meant his job at the hotel, his pride, his identity, was in jeopardy. 15 minutes after he got the notice, he called me. You did this, he said, voice shaking, not with sadness, but with rage. They're suspending my license because of you. No, I replied. They're suspending it because of what you posted. It was a joke. You're a chef, Felix. You served someone food without consent. The moment you filmed it, you created evidence against yourself. You're trying to destroy me. I'm not trying to destroy anything. I'm protecting myself. He hung up on me. The next morning, I learned through one of his former coworkers who had quietly messaged me out of sympathy that the hotel had terminated his employment. They couldn't legally keep a chef who couldn't work with food. Felix had apparently screamed at his manager, caused a scene, and left the property, refusing to sign his termination documents. That afternoon, he texted me again. Please, just tell them you overreacted. Tell them you forgive me. Tell them I'm not a danger. Please. It was the first time he had ever used the word please since all of this began. But it didn't change the truth. I can't lie, I answered. You filmed yourself. You posted it. You refused to delete it. You doubled down in the comments. This is not something I caused. This is something you did." His response came several minutes later. "You're cold. You're heartless. You're leaving me to suffer." I didn't respond. That night, his family started calling me. His sister left 3 voicemails calling me vindictive. His father sent a long text accusing me of enjoying Felix's downfall. His mother asked me if I really wanted to be the reason her son lost everything. Not one of them mentioned the dog food. Not one acknowledged the betrayal. They wanted me to carry responsibility for the mess Felix had gleefully created online. By the end of the week, Felix's desperation took a darker turn. He filed a police report claiming I had stolen his grandmother's ring, an heirloom supposedly worth $3,000. I felt sick when the detective contacted me asking me to come in for questioning. I gathered every photo I'd taken while removing my belongings from the apartment time-stamped and organized, and my attorney accompanied me to the station. The detective reviewed the photos carefully. "None of these images show jewelry," he noted. "Only your personal property." "That's all I took," I said. He asked a few more questions, reviewed the timeline, and then sat back in his chair. "This looks like a false report," he said plainly. "We'll have to follow up with him." Later that evening, Felix suddenly found the ring in a different jewelry box. The case was closed, but the police noted the incident as suspected false reporting. His attorney called mine the next morning. "This needs to stop," she said. "My client is spiraling." My attorney replied, "Then tell him to stop making false accusations and accept the divorce." In truth, Felix wasn't spiraling because of me. He was spiraling because he had built his entire life on an image of himself that finally cracked, and he couldn't bear to see what lay beneath. He tried one last thing that week. He texted me from an unknown number. "I hope you're happy. You took everything from me, my job, my reputation, my stability, all because you couldn't take a joke. I will never forgive you." I saved the message, forwarded it to my attorney, and blocked the number. By then, the chaos he created had reached a level even he could no longer control. His career was suspended, his finances were unraveling, his attempts at manipulation were documented, and the world he had curated around himself carefully, arrogantly, was beginning to collapse. He had spent years plating dishes with precision, control, and ego. Now, for the first time, nothing in his life could be arranged neatly. Everything was spilled, spoiled, and spreading faster than he could contain. And for the first time in months, I felt the smallest, faintest sense of peace, not victory, not satisfaction, just relief. Because I finally understood something I had never seen clearly before. You can love someone deeply and still be blinded to the damage they are capable of. But once they show it to you plainly, once they laugh while hurting you, once they reveal the truth behind the performance, you can't unknow it. Not ever again. The 3 months that followed felt strangely quiet compared to the chaos Felix had created in the beginning. Not peaceful, just quiet like the air, right after a storm destroys everything it touches. You don't hear the wind anymore. You only hear what's left. The divorce had moved steadily through the system. The paperwork, the mediation notes, the financial disclosures, each step was draining, but each one brought me closer to the end. When the court date finally arrived to finalize everything, I felt more tired than anything else. Tired but ready. The judge reviewed our agreements. 50-50 split of assets. Shared furniture divided based on receipts. Felix would take the kitchen tools he insisted were extensions of his identity. I would take the electronics I had purchased, and we would both pay our portions of the apartment lease until it expired. It was fair. It was clean. But fairness meant nothing to Felix. He glared at me across the courtroom like I had siphoned the oxygen from his lungs. His attorney kept placing a hand on his arm to stop him from interrupting the judge, but he simmered visibly, jaw tight, foot-bouncing nostrils flaring with the frustration of someone who still believed he was the aggrieved party. When the judge signed the papers and declared our marriage dissolved, Felix let out a short, sharp breath. Not relief, resentment. He looked at me like I had personally ruined his future. In his mind, I suspect I had, but only because he refused to see who had actually caused the collapse. The apartment situation resolved itself faster than expected. Felix couldn't afford his portion of the rent after his paid suspension ended and shifted to unpaid status. Without income, he fell behind within a month. He tried to negotiate with the landlord, attempted to blame me, even begged for an extension, but the lease couldn't accommodate his personal chaos. He ended up breaking it 2 weeks before it was set to expire, incurring a penalty he had no choice but to cover. When the health department's formal review concluded, the results were even harsher than the preliminary findings. His food handler's license was suspended for 8 months, not 6. The report cited a troubling lack of understanding regarding food safety ethics, consent, and professional boundaries. The hotel terminated him officially within the week. A mutual acquaintance, one of the few people who remained neutral later, told me he'd tried to sue the hotel for wrongful termination. His claim didn't even make it past the first consultation. The TikTok video, despite everything, still existed online. He never deleted it. He never accepted responsibility. It remained as a permanent timestamp of the moment he chose humiliation over honesty. Every future employer who Googled his name saw it instantly. His online presence was no longer a portfolio, it was a warning. After a month of job searching, Felix ended up working retail at a home decor store in his parents' town, 5 hours away in a different state. He moved back in with them, something he had always sworn he would never do. If pride had a taste, I imagine it was bitter in his mouth. His attorney contacted mine one last time, requesting that I provide a written statement to the health department claiming I had misinterpreted the prank and that Felix had learned from the experience. My attorney didn't even need to ask me. She sent the reply on her own. My client will not commit perjury. After that, Felix stopped trying to reach me, for a while. But the consequences that followed him didn't stop. Mutual friends drifted away from me and toward him, or toward silence. Not because they believed him, but because entitlement is loud, and loud people often demand an audience. They didn't want to be the ones he turned on next. I didn't blame them. Some losses stopped hurting when I understood the reasoning. Meanwhile, my life began to settle into something that resembled stability. My studio apartment was small, but it was mine. No clattering footsteps in the kitchen, no camera suddenly lifted toward my face, no man laughing while I swallowed something I didn't consent to. The quiet wasn't lonely, it was pure relief. Work became a refuge. My boss, after the HR incident Felix had triggered, had been nothing but supportive. I threw myself into projects, into rebuilding my sense of normalcy, and unexpectedly into therapy. Therapy wasn't something I ever imagined needing, but after everything I craved a space where I could speak without being minimized. I learned things I should have known earlier, like how often I had prioritized keeping the peace over protecting myself. How many small moments of disrespect I had explained away. How rarely I had allowed myself to feel anger without guilt. My therapist called it trained emotional suppression, the habit of shrinking yourself so someone else doesn't explode. I had been shrinking for years. Felix's prank hadn't created that truth. It had revealed it. I thought about dating a few times, but the idea felt strange, almost too delicate. Love wasn't something I was ready to risk again, not when I was still learning how to trust my own instincts. I wanted to know I could spot red flags before I let someone close to me again. I wanted to make sure I knew how to protect myself. Still, there were moments I mourned things not. Felix, not the marriage, but the years I had given to someone who didn't value them. 7 years of small sacrifices of adjusting myself to fit his needs, of believing love meant tolerance, even when tolerance meant slowly dissolving. One evening, while unpacking a box I had ignored for months, I found a photo from one of our early dates. He was smiling at the camera, confident and charming. I was leaning into him with trust in my eyes, ignorant of what the future would hold. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I simply felt distance, like I was looking at someone else's life. Because in many ways I was. The collapse of our marriage wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, structural failure. The prank was just the final blow. And as I stood there in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the simple peace of having no one mocking or manipulating me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like myself, and that after everything was worth far more than the marriage I lost. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I woke up one morning and realized something had changed. Not dramatically, not like a cinematic breakthrough, just a quiet shift, subtle, but unmistakable. For the first time in years, I didn't open my eyes bracing for conflict or criticism or another emotional landmine disguised as a joke. I simply woke up in a space that was mine with a life that was finally beginning to feel like my own. The studio apartment was small, but it became a sanctuary. The first weeks after moving in, the silence felt unfamiliar, almost startling. But slowly that silence transformed from emptiness into comfort. I could hear myself think again. I could cook without flinching when a cabinet door closed too loudly. I could sit on the couch and actually breathe. I didn't fully realize how much emotional vigilance I had lived under until it was gone. Work was going better than it had in years. A month after everything settled, my supervisor called me into a meeting, not to reprimand me, not to question me, but to offer me a promotion. A real one. Higher pay, better projects, a vote of confidence I hadn't expected. I went home that day and cried, not out of sadness, but relief. It felt like the universe had finally taken its foot off my neck. Meanwhile, Felix's situation continued to unravel, though I wasn't involved in it anymore. Word trickled back to me through mutual acquaintances, never in cruel detail, just in the factual, distant way people share neutral information. His 8-month license suspension remained in effect. He had attempted to start consulting, but every potential employer found the video within minutes. He had become unwillingly and permanently that chef who fed his wife dog food for TikTok. Eventually, he stopped trying to work in food altogether. Last I heard, he was still living with his parents and working at a home goods store, a humbling job for someone who once introduced himself as Chef Felix Mercer, even at family gatherings. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing any of it, not really. His downfall didn't make me glow inside. It just reinforced something I had come to accept: people who refuse accountability inevitably collide with the consequences they try so hard to outrun. And Felix had been sprinting straight into them face first. Strangely, therapy helped me feel compassion not for Felix, but for myself, for the woman I had been when all this started. A woman who made herself smaller to keep harmony. A woman who swallowed discomfort because she believed love meant endurance. A woman who thought loyalty required silence. I had been wrong. Love cannot exist where respect does not live, and endurance is not the same as partnership. My therapist once told me during a session, I remember vividly, "You're not grieving him. You're grieving the version of yourself who tolerated him." And she was right. I wasn't mourning the marriage, I was mourning my own lost years. As I rebuilt my routines, I found pleasure in small, ordinary things. Buying fresh flowers every Sunday. Rearranging furniture just because I felt like it. Listening to music out loud without worrying that someone would mock my taste. The freedom was simple and profound. Dating was something I hadn't even considered, not out of bitterness, but because I finally understood the value of knowing myself before letting someone else close. I wanted to strengthen the boundaries I had allowed to erode. I wanted to trust my instincts again. And I wanted to feel whole, not half of a damaged pair. One evening, after cleaning the apartment and rearranging a few things, I opened the window and let the night breeze drift in. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking around the room lit softly by the warm glow of a small lamp. It was ordinary, quiet, barely decorated, but it felt like the safest place I'd been in years. I thought of the version of myself who sat at that dinner table eating cracker after cracker of something she didn't consent to smiling politely, because she trusted the man across from her. I thought of the way he laughed at her, how she ran to the bathroom feeling betrayed in a way she didn't yet have words for. I thought of the panic, the confusion, the heartbreak. I wished I could reach back into that moment and put a hand on her shoulder, not to warn her because warnings don't always change the path, but simply to tell her that she would come out on the other side stronger, wiser, and more herself than she had been in years. The truth is, it was never about the dog food. It wasn't even about the video. It was about consent, about respect, about the fundamental understanding that a partner is not an audience and a marriage is not content. Felix never learned that. He never wanted to, but I did. There is peace in choosing yourself, in walking away from what corrodes you, in accepting that some stories don't need a villain to be painful, they just need a moment of clarity to end. I haven't forgiven Felix. I don't know if I ever will. Forgiveness requires accountability, and he still insists he did one harmless prank and that everything that followed was my fault. But forgiveness isn't the same as freedom, and freedom, I learned, is something you grant yourself. As I sat in my small, quiet apartment listening to the distant hum of the city outside, I felt a warmth settle in my chest. Not joy, exactly, something steadier, a sense of groundedness, a recognition that I had survived something that had been eroding me for years. I didn't know what the future held yet, but whatever it was,